Hey guys, welcome back. This is our last discussion on branches of government, and we're going to be looking at the judicial branch, or most people think of that as the Supreme Court, the judicial branch. The judicial branch is composed of the Supreme Court and all lower federal courts. It was created by Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, and its most significant power is judicial review, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Main roles and powers. It interprets the law. So anything that gets passed by Congress and signed into law by the president then moves on to the Supreme Court, and they interpret and decide or determine the legality of the law. They exercise the power of, by doing this, they exercise the power of judicial review. The Chief Justice resides over trials of presidential impeachment, and so we've talked about that. So the Senate serves as the jury. If there was a trial for impeachment, the Senate would serve as a jury. The House of Representatives would serve as the prosecution, or they would be working to prove the government's case. And then the Chief Justice would reside over the trial. He would be the judge. Our current justices, the court, essentially there's 9 justices. They always want 9 justices, so decisions don't end up in a tie. As often as we like to think this, politics do play a role in who gets nominated and how the decisions are handed down. So the people circled in red would be associated with conservative viewpoints, and the people circled in blue would be associated with more liberal viewpoints. The most current justice to be added to the Supreme Court is Neil Gorsuch, and he replaced Anthony Scalia, who passed away. Judicial review and jurisdiction. So they like we were talking about, they determine the legality of the laws passed by Congress, the legality of treaties negotiated by the president. So not only would the president need congressional approval on any kind of treaty, the Supreme Court would also interpret the legality of the treaty. And then actions of the president himself, and also laws passed by states. So jurisdiction then. Here's cases of appeal from federal and state courts, and the Supreme Court possesses original jurisdiction. So basically they determine which cases they want to hear. You hear that people might say that, well, we're going to fight all the way to the Supreme Court. Well, the Supreme Court decides if they want to hear a case or not. Terms of service. So they can serve for life. Once they're appointed, they can serve, as long as they want. Depending upon if they're conservative or liberal, they would, as they get up there in years, they kind of wait until a president with whom they share a particular political viewpoint with comes into office, and then they retire, so they know that someone else of the same political preference would be nominated to replace them. They're nominated by the president and approved by the Senate. So again, that system of checks and balances. But they can also be removed through impeachment. So if they're doing things that aren't very justice-like or not following the law, they can be removed through impeachment. And there's no specific requirements for judgeship. So part of the process, though, is you have to go through a Senate confirmation hearing. So that approval by the Senate, the Senate's going to a vetting process, looking for information, seeing if there's things that don't correspond with what they want Supreme Court justice to have, so to speak. So what we know we have a legislative branch, an executive branch, and the Supreme Court. The legislative branch is broken down into the House of Representatives and the Senate. Remember that it's that bicameral two-house. "49 states have a bicameral legislature too. We have a House Representatives and a Senate within our state government. Nebraska would be the only one that has a unicameral legislator. They only have one body of legislators for their state government. The executive branch, then, the two top dogs, so to speak, would be the president and the vice president. We really didn't talk about special powers of the vice president. You know, he doesn't hold a lot. Should there ever be a tie, though, in the Senate, the vice president would vote to break the tie. That doesn't happen too often. But remember, there's 100 senators. So if it came down to a 50-50 tie, the vice president would cast his vote. And then we have the 9 members of the Supreme Court, 8 justices, and then a chief justice. And then something to okay, well, I guess it's not going to advance. I had a little comic in there for you to leave you with, something to think about. I appreciate you spending time and going through our discussions of the 3 branches of government. Remember, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch.